My name is Leonard Capel, and this is my company paper on the Food and Drug Administration, better known as the FDA. What does the FDA do, and what is it? Well, the FDA is an agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services responsible for regulating certain consumer products. They regulate medical products, tobacco, foods, veterinary medicine, and other consumer goods. How did the FDA get started? On June 30th, 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Food and Drug Act, known as the Wiley Act, a reference to chemist Harvey Washington Wiley, MD. He is known as the father of the FDA. Dr. Wiley demonstrated his concern about chemical preservatives in foods by calling them adulterants. The act, signed by Teddy Roosevelt, was pushed by the Bureau of Chemistry, which was charged with administering, prohibiting the adulteration and misbranding of food and drugs. The law basically said that you couldn't add hazardous materials to food or conceal problems with food. To this point, there were companies selling food that had been spoiled, that had been contaminated by rodents while in storage and sold anyway, and foods that had certain harmful chemicals as ingredients that were not disclosed to the consumer, which had led to many people becoming ill and even dying. Although the Act did not establish standards for food, it did enforce the labeling of ingredients. The food and drug label could not be false or misleading, and the presence and amount of 11 dangerous ingredients, including at the time alcohol, heroin, and cocaine, had to be listed. The worst example of the consequences of making false claims on labels came in 1937, when a Tennessee drug company marketed a form of a new sulfur wonder drug that would appeal to pediatric patients, known as elixir sulfamalonide. The sulfate in the untested product was a highly toxic chemical analog of antifreeze. Now we know just how deadly that chemical can be, especially for children. The wonder drug killed more than 100 people. Many of them were children. The public outcry reshaped the drug provisions of the new law and propelled the bill through Congress. The Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act was signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt on June 25, 1938. It brought cosmetics and medical devices adequate directions for their safe use. The law also mandated the pre-market approval of all new drugs. Companies thereafter would have to submit to the FDA evidence that their product was safe before it could go to market. Although this law has been amended many times, it's the law the FDA still operates under today. Following hearings in the early 1950s, a series of laws addressing pesticide residues in 1954, food additives in 1958, and color additives in 1960 gave the FDA much tighter control over the growing list of chemicals entering the food supply, thus putting the onus on manufacturers to establish their safety. The FDA also got a stronger hold on the drugs being marketed and tested thanks to the Keffer-Harris amendments that were passed in 1962. The amendment mandated that companies prove that their drug was safe before it could be marketed, as well as instituting stricter agency controls over drug trials. It also transferred the regulation of prescription drug advertising to the FDA. In the 1960s and 70s, they saw there was a tremendous growth in the medical device industry. This prompted the FDA to pass amendments that mandated the reporting of adverse reactions to medical devices and post-market monitoring of implants and other devices that pose a serious health risk. The amendments gave the FDA the authority to recall medical devices. With so many medical devices flooding the market, there was also a realization that not all the devices were the same. And so with amendments in 1976, the FDA not only made a requirement for pre-market approval for medical devices, but also categories for different devices. In the 1970s, the FDA began protecting people against unnecessary exposure for radiation from electronics as well. In May 1980, the agency was transferred from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare to the Department of Health and Human Services, which is where it's currently part of now. In 1984, the FDA passed an act that expedites the availability of less costly generic drugs by permitting the agency to approve applications to market generic versions of brand name drugs without repeating the research done to prove them safe and effective. Basically, after a patent runs out on a name brand drug, the generic can be marketed without having to go through all of the same regulations and testing that had to be done for the name brand drug. In 1990, Congress passed the Nutrition, Labeling, and Education Act, which completely reformulated the way food products labels convey basic nutritional information. During the past decade, several laws were passed that focus on clarifying the nutritional and safety information on food labels, including the listing of trans fats and allergens. The agency has also launched initiatives to increase public awareness of the adverse effects of tobacco products. So, what are the things the FDA are in charge of regulating? Well, they regulate many products, foods, and even devices. Here are just some of the traditional products which fall under the FDA's regulatory guidance. As we mentioned, there are foods, dietary supplements, food additives, bottled water, prescription drugs, vaccines, blood and blood products, medical devices, surgical implants, X-ray equipment, microwave ovens, cosmetics, veterinary products, laser products, cigarettes, and these are just to name a few. When it comes to food, there are many thoughts about what the FDA regulates, and there could even be some confusion, so we'll separate them. The food that the FDA does regulate are foods that enter interstate commerce, most packaged foods like potato chips and cookies, most foods sold online, human and animal food, which they make sure that these foods, even for the animals, are safe for consumption, they won't cause harm, imported foods, and they regulate farms that grow and process food for others to consume. So what do they not regulate? Well, they don't regulate food service establishments, restaurants, restaurant chains, food trucks, caterers, grocery stores, food banks, cafeterias, markets, home food processors, alcoholic beverages, butcher shops, slaughterhouses, and then they don't regulate farms if they only grow their own food and it's not for processing to others. They also cover drugs and cosmetics. The FDA regulates over-the-counter medication, medication given in hospitals, prescription medication, medication given to animals, just kind of like what we're talking about with the food given to animals. They regulate those type of things. Makeup, lipstick, and other cosmetics that we use every day. They also regulate the radiation levels that we are exposed to. They do this by measuring the regulations of TVs, microwave ovens, laser printers and CD players, police radar, cell phones, which we all use, and there have been those that have been said that cell phone use can lead to cancer. So it's very important that the FDA measure the radiation coming out of these. X-ray equipment, surgical lasers, diagnostic ultrasound, radiation therapy, MRI machines, and mammography equipment used for um, looking for cancer in women. They also regulate our vaccines. So here are just a couple of vaccines you may be familiar with that are regulated by the FDA. The flu vaccine that's given out every year, the hepatitis vaccine that is given to our youth, the measles, mumps, rubella, and the COVID-19 vaccine. When the pandemic hit in 2020, the FDA worked very closely with manufacturers to come up with vaccines that would be safe for use by the public. There were three major ones, which were Moderna, and Johnson and Johnson. One of those vaccines did end up seem like it had some adverse effects, and the FDA worked closely with this company to get those effects recalled, get the vaccines recalled, and get that whatever was causing the adverse effects fixed, so that now all three of these vaccines are deemed safe for use by the FDA. So in conclusion, the FDA makes sure that the food we eat is safe. It makes sure that the medication we take is safe. It protects us from radiation. It makes sure the cosmetics we use are safe. And it makes sure the food and medication for our animals is safe. Without the FDA, who knows what we could be consuming when we go and purchase food or the medication that we take. But because we have them, we can safely take medication and eat foods that are packaged, knowing that they have been regulated and they are deemed safe for our use. Thank you very much.